Hello, I'm back with another watercolor postcard lesson where we're going to paint this gorgeous scene from the Swiss Alps in spring. I've given you a link to the reference photo that I used from Pixabay in the description below so that you've got everything ready to go and you can follow along. Let's get started. Here's my postcard with the pencil drawing all done and my workspace all ready to go. My palette with tube paints that I've spritzed to make them nice and moist. Paper towel to pick up any errors. My water is on the side. I've got some marker pens here, a couple of brushes. For the drawing, I've moved the mountain off center so that it's a far more dynamic composition. And I've decided to do it in portrait mode rather than landscape because I feel like this makes the mountain really soar. I've kept a nice diagonal slope instead of a flat slope for the meadow. And for the flowers, I've varied their shapes and sizes. So they're bigger at the front than they are in the background. So it gives a sense of depth there. And I've got the purple ones more sort of star-shaped. Buttercups are rounded. And the tiny little gentians are little star-shaped blobs as well. I've masked the flowers so that I don't have to worry about them when I do the painting. So I've used some Winsor & Newton masking fluid, and I do it with an old ruling pen. But you can use a brush if you don't have one of these. If you do use a brush, must make sure that it's an old one and that you it's probably a good idea to dip it in soap first and then into your masking fluid and then onto your paper. I did the masking fluid a little while ago, so it's all dry. Pencil drawing is all done and we're ready to go. We're going to start with the sky, and I know in the reference photo the sky is just a beautiful clear blue with no clouds. I think that's a little bit boring, so we're going to put some clouds in. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix up the sky color, and I'm using an Escoda Perla number 10, so quite a big brush. And I'm mixing up cobalt blue, a puddle of cobalt blue. And then that same cobalt blue to make a cloud shadow color, I'm going to add a little bit of burnt umber. Just to warm it up a bit, make a warmish grey. So there's my two colors for the sky. And then I'm going to wet the sky with clean water. So I clean my brush thoroughly and I come in and I just mark with clean water where I want the sky to be. Careful shaping around the mountain, particularly on the side, like the side here has a bit of snow, so I don't want to get any sky color on the snow. I have my paper towel handy if I drop any water where I didn't want it by mistake. Then I can just pick it up with my paper towel. I want a nice sort of dynamic edge to the picture, but if you wanted to, you could, if you wanted a really tidy edge, you could tape it instead of just taping it along the top like I've done here. So nice even wetness across the whole of the sky. And then I'm going to drop in some cloud streaks starting with the cobalt blue mix that I've got there. And I'm just going to let the water carry those streaks where it wants to. Sky darker at the top, then at the bottom towards the horizon. And then a touch of the shadow color. I'm going to clean and dry my brush, and then with this thirsty brush I'm going to pick out some cloud streaks by just twirling my brush, that thirsty brush, across the sky. trying to keep the mark nice and varied. Clean it, dry it, and pick up a streak. Bigger streaks at the top of the sky, smaller streaks towards the bottom. A little bit darker along the top. And that's the sky done. So while I'm waiting for the sky to dry, I can come in and do the meadow here at the front. I don't want to do the mountain just yet, because if I do it while the sky is wet, it will just run into the sky and create a whole lot of soft edges. So for the meadow, I'm going to start off with some Indian yellow. So I'm just mixing up a very light mix of Indian yellow and some sap green. So first with the highlight color, the Indian yellow. I'm going to add in some random grasses. Now, if you look at the reference photo, you probably think that the meadow is all just green, but it's a lot of shades of green. So if we start with a highlight color first, we'll create a lot more interest than if we just went in just with plain green. So we're going to do this highlight color of the Indian yellow, and then we're going to drop the sap green in, and then a shadow color as well. That's with the Indian yellow, and then while that's still wet, I pick up the sap green and drop that in. Starting to go darker and richer in my mix now, and varying the strokes so they don't all go in the same direction. I'm right-handed, so I have a tendency to make all my marks go in one direction, and I suppose most people do, depending on your dominant hand. So you'll see me twisting my wrist around to make sure that I don't have all the grass blades going in the same direction. I'm going to take the cobalt blue now, or whatever color you used for your sky, and add it to the green to make a darker green, to add some shadow grasses in now as well. And then make it even darker by adding some Payne's grey. And this will have, particularly in the foreground, gives us a sense of depth if we have the darker color in the foreground and lighter color towards the back. I'm going to leave it there and dry it with the hairdryer, and I'll be back in a moment. So I dried it with a hairdryer and it's perfectly dry now, so I can come in and do the mountain. I'm going to still stick with this biggish brush, and I'm going to mix up the color now for the rocks. So we've got some of the area that I've marked in here will be rocks, some will be snow, and some will be areas that are rocks and snow. And I'm going to again use the same color colors that I used for the sky. So it was the cobalt blue and the burnt umber here. So I'm just going to remix that, keeping it on the bluish side, at least to begin with, to make it look like it's far away. I'm going to add a touch of purple. Because I'm going to be using purple later in the flowers, it's good to bring that in. And we've got purple and yellow flowers, complementary colors there, so that works really well. So not too purple, still want to keep it on the blue side. Touch of the burnt umber. And now I've got a grayish purple mix. So just using the tip of my brush and looking carefully at the reference photo so that I make sure I get, I don't get any rock color where there is snow. And you can take your time here. There's no rush, and you'll see me leaving little gaps that will be there for the snow. Some of them going in a vertical direction, and snow that's caught on the ledges as well. Now this part of the mountain is further away than this one here. So when I get to this rock here, I'm going to add a touch more burnt umber to my mix to warm it up just a little bit. Not a great crashing change, but just a little bit. And I'm going to paint this in the slightly warmer color. And that will bring this forward. And this patch here is even warmer. So a touch more of the burnt umber. And we should start seeing some depth in our mountain now. That's the rock part of the mountain done. And now we just want to give a little bit of form to that snow so that it's not completely flat. And for that, I'm going to mix up a little bit of cerulean blue, keeping it really, really light. And I'm just going to mark in some of the form in the snow. So these are some crevasses on that glacier. Again, following the direction, trying to keep my brush strokes following the form. There's a bit of a shadow mark over here. And actually these streaks come in this direction. And this side of the mountain is in shadow, so that snow I'm going to block in with the cerulean blue as well. Now this is pretty dry, and I want to just create some form in that mountain. So this side is in shadow. So back to my rock color mix. I'm going to go just a tad darker. So exactly the same mix, cobalt blue, burnt umber, and I've got permanent violet here, just a bit darker. So for the meadow here in the front, I've already got a sense of recession going from the nice dark colors here to slightly lighter, blurrier colors. But everything is very blurry at the moment. And to exaggerate that depth even more, I want to create here, just in the foreground, some nice sharp brush strokes. So still with this brush, which has got a lovely springy point, and that darkish green that we mixed, I'm just going to flick in some grasses, mostly here in the foreground. And again, because I've got that masking fluid, I don't really have to worry about the flowers at the moment. And I want to vary my brush strokes, so nice big dark marks here in the foreground, going in all directions. And then as I get to the background, finer marks, smaller marks, and not too many of them. So I'm happy with the meadow now, but I feel like that shadow that I've got on the side of the mountain isn't really enough of a contrast. So changing to a smaller brush, I'm going to add another layer of shadow on the side of the mountain there, just on the rocks. So a nice thick paint. So now it's completely dry, just checking that it's all at sort of normal room temperature. And just with a normal hardish eraser, I'm going to just remove the masking fluid. Now we're going to bring it all to life. So I've cleaned my palette so that I can get nice bright colors for my flowers. And we've got the purple star-shaped flowers. I think they're some sort of crocus, the buttercups and the gentians. And what we want to do is we want to have much more saturated colors here in the foreground and more variation in color. And as we go towards the back, we can use the same colors, but we're just going to fade them a little bit just to give them give the postcard a sense of depth. So to my tiny brush, this is an Etchr number 3, and it has a very sharp point, but quite long bristles, so it holds a lot of paint. So let's start with the purple ones. Some permanent violet. And a touch of quinacridone rose, just to add some variation. My preference is always to mix colors rather than to use them straight from the tube. It just usually looks more interesting than if you just use it straight from the tube. So starting with these ones, and I want the shapes to be slightly different, so I've made these ones more star shaped than the rounder shapes of the buttercups, and I've grouped them together, so different sizes, different edges as well. I'm leaving a little bit of white to make it look like the sun is catching them at the shiny. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to drop in a little bit more of the pink just to keep it interesting, so it's not just a flat, doesn't just look like you used a colouring in book. So the first ones. And now as I go towards the back, I'm going to put some purple marks in there, but I'm going to keep them much lighter, so I'm going to add more water to my mix. From here. Onto the buttercups, and I'm going to use cadmium yellow hue, which is basically a buttercup color, I think. So these have a more rounded shape than the purple flowers. And then while they're still wet, this is pyrrole orange, just towards their centers or along the bottoms. Now they look a bit more like daffodils than buttercups, but never mind. No one needs to know. Well, that looks like that should be a purple one. And then again, as we go towards the back, a bit more water to our mix so that it's lighter. And just drop in some yellow blobs. And then for the gentians, I'm going to use phthalo blue. Very intense color. And then while they're still wet, a drop of the quinacridone rose again. A little bit more form to these front ones, these front purple ones, with a very thick mix of the permanent violet. And the same with the buttercups, a touch of the pyrrole orange. Time to let it dry again, and then we're going to come in just with a little bit of pen work to sharpen it up. I've got 3 different pens here. I have 2 Posca markers, a white one and a yellow one, and this fountain pen is filled with permanent very dark brown ink. So I'm going to start with this just to give a little bit of more texture here in the front, so that again we get that sense of recession. So just some grasses or stems for our flowers, and mostly here in the front. Then some white dots with my Posca marker. Oh, always shake it with the lid on. I love doing some white dots. I feel like it adds a lot of sparkle to my painting. I just want the foreground to be very busy and vibrant, very spring-like. And all that's left to do is sign it. Now mine's quite dark here in the foreground, so I'm going to sign it with a white gel pen, but if yours is light you could use a black marker instead. And there you go, we've got a lovely little watercolor postcard. All we have to do is write a little note on the back, pop on a stamp, and I would seal it with some acrylic varnish so that it survives the mail. Send some love to somebody. Happy painting. Until next time. Ciao.